I am so thrilled to have you here. Look, if you're a focus learner trying to figure out exactly what keeps going wrong out in your yard, well, you are in the perfect place. Today, we're taking a fascinating, biology-first look at modern master-planned communities. We're talking places like Lakewood Ranch, Babcock Ranch, or honestly, pretty much any newly developed Florida neighborhood. You know, most people move down to Florida and just assume landscaping is going to be an absolute breeze, right? It rains all summer, it's warm year-round, plants just seem to grow everywhere on their own. But as we're about to uncover, the reality for a lot of homeowners is actually quite the opposite. So let's tackle the big question right out of the gate. Why is your Florida landscape struggling? You've got the endless sunshine, you got that heavy summer rain, and hey, the landscapers installed everything beautifully when the house was first built. Yet give it just a few years and the frustration really starts to set in. You step outside and you start noticing your shrubs are turning this pale, sickly yellow. Some plants simply refuse to grow an inch, your trees look kind of thin and sparse, and you've got these weird patches in your yard where water either sits in giant puddles for days or just dries up instantly. And suddenly, you're constantly spending your weekend money on replacement plants and heavy bags of fertilizer.
Well, take a deep breath. Seriously, it might not be your fault. I know it's incredibly frustrating to pour your time and your hard-earned money into a dying landscape, constantly second-guessing your own gardening skills. But I want to validate that feeling for you right now. All those dying plants, the wasted fertilizer, the endless, agonizing watering cycles, it is highly, highly likely that your green thumb is perfectly fine. Actually, the real culprit is something you probably haven't even considered looking at.
Okay, let's dive into Section 1, the Florida landscape myth, above ground versus underground.
Think about it. When a plant looks sick, our very first assumption is usually, oh, I need more fertilizer, right? And if that doesn't work, our second assumption is, well, the irrigation system must be broken, I definitely need to add more water. We focus entirely on what we can apply from the top down, but the reality is that the problem is almost always hidden entirely underground. The issue isn't a lack of chemical sprays or broken sprinkler heads, the problem is the soil itself.
And that brings us to, honestly, the biggest myth of all. Most people think plants grow in dirt. They don't. They grow in soil. Dirt is dead. Soil is alive. Healthy soil is essentially a living sponge. It contains water and organic matter, sure, but it also relies heavily on a whole ecosystem of beneficial fungi, bacteria, earthworms, and crucially, air. Those empty pore spaces are absolutely vital because roots need oxygen just as much as they need water to survive. When soil loses that living, porous sponge structure, your plants immediately begin to struggle.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 2, what happens during construction. Let's do a quick flashback. Before your neighborhood was built, that land had decades, maybe even centuries, of natural soil layers, native vegetation, and really healthy biological activity. But then, construction begins. In a matter of just months, bulldozers come in and clear away all that native vegetation. Over the following weeks, massive heavy equipment repeatedly drives over the site, installing roads and laying utilities, heavily compacting the earth with every pass. Finally, in a matter of mere days, imported fill dirt is trucked in just to elevate the house pads. By the time your beautiful new landscaping is finally installed, that original living soil system is completely gone. What remains is basically an engineered construction platform. Now, it is absolutely great for holding up your house, but it is deeply, deeply hostile to plant life.
Now, let's look at the fallout from that in Section 3, the hidden soil problems.
The first massive issue here is compacted soil. Remember our living sponge analogy from earlier? Well, all that heavy construction equipment compresses the earth. Imagine taking a regular kitchen sponge and squeezing it as hard as you literally can in your fist. The sponge itself doesn't disappear, right? But all those tiny air pockets completely collapse. That exact same thing happens underground on your newly built property. Without those air pockets, roots physically struggle to expand. Rainwater cannot easily infiltrate the ground, and oxygen simply cannot reach the roots. The second major hidden problem, and this one is super sneaky, is high pH. This is perhaps one of the least understood issues in all of Florida landscaping. You know, most homeowners never test their soil's pH, but during that construction phase we talked about, a ton of debris gets left behind. Lime rock, shell material, concrete dust, mortar residue, even stucco washout. All of these alkaline materials artificially spike the pH level of your soil. So why does this matter? Because pH acts as a gatekeeper. When the pH is too high, it literally prevents your plants from absorbing vital nutrients, especially things like iron, manganese, and zinc. I absolutely love this analogy. It is exactly like having food locked in a refrigerator that you can't open. You can dump expensive bags of fertilizer on your yard all day long. The nutrients might actually be sitting right there in the dirt. But because of that high pH from all the construction debris, the plant simply cannot absorb them. The food is right there, but the plant is locked out. This is exactly why throwing more fertilizer at a struggling Florida yard often does absolutely nothing.
Let's map this out in Section 4, Symptoms of Struggling Plants.
Let's connect the dots here between those painful visible symptoms you see above ground and the hidden construction causes we just went over. If you have standing water for more than, say, 24 to 48 hours after a typical rainstorm, you are likely dealing with that collapsed sponge compaction or a hard pan layer. How about yellow leaves, even though you've been fertilizing? That is classic iron chlorosis, straight up caused by high pH. What if your trees blow over super easily in our regular summer storms? Well, that's because builder-installed trees are often planted in tiny, restricted root zones surrounded by sidewalks and driveways, which forces them to grow incredibly shallow roots. And those random weird patches of dead turf? Very often, that's literally buried concrete or severe compaction just a few inches below the grass.
And this perfectly sets up what I call the irrigation trap. It is a really dangerous cycle. When roots are trapped in that compacted, squeezed sponge soil, the water just sits there. It doesn't drain. The roots stay totally saturated and become completely oxygen-starved. Now here is the wild part. An oxygen-starved plant responds by wilting, turning yellow, and dropping its leaves, which unfortunately looks exactly like a drought-stressed plant. So what do we naturally do? We see a wilting plant and we immediately turn up the sprinklers. You end up adding more water to a plant that is already drowning, completely suffocating whatever's left of the roots.
Okay, enough doom and gloom. Let's pivot to the solutions in Section 5, 3 Steps to Success. Here is your practical roadmap out of landscaping misery. 3 straightforward, biology-first steps. Step 1, add organic matter. Step 2, mulch everything. And Step 3, plant for the soil you have. Let's break these down real quick to see why they are the absolute best things you can do to rehabilitate your Florida property.
Step 1 is to add organic matter. You see, Florida soils are naturally very low in organic matter to begin with. And as we learned, the construction process completely strips away whatever tiny bit was actually there. So, to rebuild that living sponge we keep talking about, compost is hands down the best investment you can make. Adding compost directly improves your soil's ability to hold on to water, retain nutrients, and kickstart that beneficial soil biology so your plant's roots can actually breathe and thrive again.
Moving right along to Step 2, mulch everything. Listen, Mother Nature absolutely hates bare soil. By putting down a simple 2 to 3 inch layer of organic mulch, you're protecting those sensitive root systems. You're moderating our intensely hot Florida soil temperatures, you're conserving moisture, and you're slowly building up that organic matter as the mulch breaks down over time. But hey, here's a very crucial warning. Keep the mulch away from the actual trunks of your trees and shrubs. No mulch volcanoes. Piling mulch high against the trunk just introduces rot and disease. Keep it nice and flat and spread it out.
Finally, Step 3. Plant for the soil you have. This is the golden rule of landscaping, often called right plant, right place. Instead of constantly, exhaustingly fighting the high pH, the poor drainage, and the brutal sun exposure of your engineered soil, just work with it. Florida native plants evolved over thousands of years in sandy soils, high temperatures, and extreme wet and dry cycles. A shrub that looks absolutely gorgeous in Ohio or California might struggle in Florida forever. Not because it's a bad plant, but simply because it's in the completely wrong environment. Choosing plants that are already adapted to your specific yard's conditions is infinitely easier than trying to force a fragile plant to survive in a hostile construction zone.
So, let's wrap up with this. Healthy roots are where every successful Florida landscape begins. The healthiest, most vibrant yards in your neighborhood are rarely the ones getting pumped full of the most irrigation water or the most chemical fertilizer. No, they're the ones growing in living soil that actually supports root expansion and oxygen flow. I really hope this explainer has completely shifted how you look at your yard. The next time you walk outside, don't just look at the wilting leaves. Look down, think about that living sponge, and ask yourself, what is actually happening beneath the surface? And is your soil truly alive enough to support the yard of your dreams?
Seek knowledge with curiosity. Explore the varied path at viavaria.co.